4 University of Idaho students, Kaylee Gonzalez, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin, were brutally murdered inside their home. 2 others survived, unaware of the nightmare that had just unfolded around them. In part 1 of our 5-part series, we went back to the weeks leading up to the tragedy, where strange incidents began to pile up and set off some alarms for the roommates. Tonight, in part 2, we step into the aftermath of one of the most horrifying crime scenes Moscow police officers have ever encountered. Let's get into it.
Classes are canceled for the University of Idaho today following the deaths of 4 students.
Just a moment ago, Moscow police confirmed 4 people were found dead in a home just steps away from the University of Idaho campus.
The cause of death for Ethan, Kaylee, Xana, Madison, it's all listed as murder by stabbing. All were pronounced dead at noon on Sunday.
Hi, I'm Katie Ring, and this is Crime House Daily, your weekday true crime companion. We follow the cases making headlines now, where justice is still unfolding. This is a Night Watch episode bringing you today's biggest crime stories. Don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel at Crime House Daily so you never miss an episode. This episode discusses active criminal cases and breaking news. The information we share is based on what's publicly available at the time of recording and may change as new evidence comes to light. We aim to inform, not to decide guilt or innocence. So everyone mentioned is presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Tonight, we're getting into part 2 of our 5-episode deep dive on the Idaho student murders, where Bryan Kohberger murdered 4 friends in their house on 1122 King Road in the safe, low-key college town of Moscow, Idaho. In the last episode, we covered the weeks leading up to the night 19-year-old Dylan Mortensen spotted an intruder inside the house on 1122 King Road, including a few eerie instances when 21-year-old Kaylee Gonzalez noticed a strange man watching her, and when the housemates came home to find their door wide open. Tonight, we're picking up with the investigation as it unfolds at the scene. On the afternoon of Sunday, November 13th, 2022, Dylan, her housemate Bethany Funk, and their friends who live nearby, Hunter, Emily, and Josie, are standing outside 1122 King Road while police are inside. By now, they have caught wind that their friends, 20-year-old Xana Kernodle and 20-year-old Ethan Chapin, are dead, but they don't know how they died. At the same time, they aren't getting any answers from police about Kaylee and their other housemate, 21-year-old Madison Mogen. They don't know where Kaylee and Maddie are, or if they're okay. Inside the house, Moscow police officer Mitch Nunez has found Xana and Ethan dead in Xana's second-floor bedroom. They both sustained multiple stab wounds, and the room is covered in blood. Nunez calls for backup before going upstairs to check on Kaylee and Maddie. When he reaches the 3rd floor of the house, his heart sinks. Maddie's bedroom door is ajar, and he can see both young women on the bed, covered in blood, just like Xana and Ethan. When Nunez gets closer, he notices that Kaylee and Maddie are both lying under a pink blanket. It's clear that they went to bed the night before feeling safe and carefree, and had no idea of the nightmare that was coming. Nunez also strongly suspects that the same person attacked all 4 students, because Kaylee and Maddie have similar wounds as Xana and Ethan. There's a large gash on the right side of Maddie's face and visible knife wounds on her forearm and hands. The injuries to Kaylee's face are so severe, she's barely recognizable. Officer Nunez never expected anything like this to happen in Moscow. But now that it has, the investigation moves fast. The backup he called quickly arrives. Among the more senior officers is Sergeant Shane Gunderson. Sergeant Gunderson surveys the home. He knows that somewhere among the bloody scene, there must be some evidence of who killed these 4 innocent college students, which means he needs to make sure the scene can't be contaminated, which first means removing Kaylee's dog Murphy from the home. Fortunately, Murphy hasn't been hurt. Police bring him to the local Humane Society before Kaylee's ex-boyfriend comes to claim him. Meanwhile, Sergeant Gunderson and the rest of the team start getting a closer look at the victims. They start in Xana's bedroom on the northwest side of the second floor. There's blood smeared on the floor and splattered all over the walls, including a portion of the wall above Xana's body. She's in her underwear and a gray shirt, both of which are covered in blood. Her face and body are caked in dry blood, and there's defensive wounds on her hands, including a deep gash on her left hand between her pointer finger and thumb. Later, the medical examiner identifies over 50 stab wounds on Xana's body, including fatal lacerations to her heart and one to her right lung. She mostly sustained defensive wounds to her hands, arms, and face. Investigators can tell Xana put up a fight, and based on how close her body is to the bedroom door, it looks like she was attacked in that spot and attempted to fight off the assailant before succumbing to her injuries, which would mean the attacker then moved on to Ethan, who was asleep in bed. Investigators find Ethan laying on his back on the blood-soaked mattress, with stab wounds on the back of his legs and under his left clavicle, which severed the subclavian vein. According to the medical examiner, his jugular vein was also severed, which explains Ethan's extreme level of blood loss. While analyzing the scene, investigators noticed that Ethan's blood seeped through the wall of the house. Sergeant Gunderson now realizes how violent and sadistic this killer is. After viewing Xana and Ethan's bodies, Sergeant Gunderson goes upstairs to examine Kaylee and Maddie. First, he notices that Maddie seemed to be laying up against Kaylee when she died. Then he sees wounds on her forearm and hands, as well as the gash on her face that Officer Nunez noticed. But the worst of Maddie's injuries aren't visible at the scene. Later, the ME determines that Maddie died from fatal injuries to her left lung and liver. By now, Sergeant Gunderson is reeling from everything he's seen. But when he gets a closer look at everything Kaylee went through, he can never unsee it. Gunderson notes that Kaylee's facial structure is, quote, extremely damaged, which is in line with Officer Nunez's report that she's unrecognizable. The medical examiner also finds 2 subdural bleeds, in other words, bleeding in her brain. Not only that, but Kaylee's the only victim whose wounds show signs of strangulation. The Moscow Police Department has their work cut out for them, and they know it. They've never dealt with a crime this sudden and violent. But one thing they do know is how important it is to keep the details of the investigation under wraps, because the killer is still out there. And if too much information gets out, it might help the assailant cover their tracks. However, as the police are communicating with the University of Idaho, officials there don't seem to realize that the public hasn't been informed of anything yet, because a campus safety alert goes out, informing all students that there's been a quadruple homicide on King Road. And that's how the victims' friends and their families learn what really happened. They know now that Xana, Ethan, Kaylee, and Maddie were murdered. Dylan is beginning to realize that the person she saw the night before wasn't a prankster or some sketchy random person. It was a killer, her friend's killer. The pain and trauma are almost unbearable. But as word spreads throughout the community, things only get worse for the victims' loved ones. By late afternoon on November 13th, 2022, the hunt for the Idaho student killer is underway. The victims' friends and family members have learned what happened to their loved ones, and many of them have been brought to the Moscow police station for questioning, so investigators can start piecing together the full picture. Soon, Dylan Mortensen tells them about the man Kaylee Gonzalez saw watching her one day a few weeks before while she was walking her dog, and the man who followed her around the grocery store about a week after that. Finally, Dylan describes the day they all came home to find their front door wide open and the washing machine turned on. It's starting to seem like the killer had stalked the victims before the night of the attack. And since most of the victims are young women, investigators wonder if the killings were sexually motivated. That question becomes a little more complicated when the medical examiner informs them that none of the victims showed signs of sexual assault. But that doesn't mean that the crimes don't have any sexual motive. Based on the nature of the injuries, it's determined that the killer used a non-serrated, single-edged, very sharp weapon. In other words, a knife. Not only that, but the killer used a lot of force while stabbing the victims. According to some criminologists, this kind of stabbing indicates a sexual motive. It's something known as piquerism, which is a sexual fetish where someone is aroused by penetrating the skin with a sharp object. As a killing method, piquerism is often a substitute for sexual assault. It's a compelling idea, but before investigators run too far with this theory or any others, they need to collect more evidence. And around 4 p.m. on the 13th, they discover something crucial. Officers from the Moscow Police and Idaho State Police are processing the crime scene together. MPD Corporal Brett Payne is surveying Maddie Mogan's third-floor bedroom. When Corporal Payne examines the bed, he spots something on the floor and grabs it. It's a leather knife sheath. The sheath belongs to a certain type of knife called a K-bar knife and is stamped with the U.S. Marine Corps emblem. Corporal Payne calls over ISP Lieutenant Darren Gilbertson, who is a Marine Corps veteran. Gilbertson recognizes the style of knife immediately because during World War II, K-bar became the official fighting knife of the Marine Corps. People use K-bar knives for different things, but they're mainly known as a weapon. They're even advertised as self-defense alternatives to guns. There are different versions out there, and since this one is a Marine Corps branded K-bar, investigators hope it will narrow down possible links back to the killer. Gilbertson points out something else. Apparently, K-bar knives are known to break at the tip during combat, which makes him think there may be a piece of the murder weapon buried in one of the victim's wounds, which could help them identify the exact knife model and narrow things down even more. However, when the medical examiner takes a closer look at the victims' bodies, they don't find anything. But that doesn't slow the investigators' momentum. They begin tracking down all the K-bar knives that have been purchased in the area. It's a bit of a tricky process, because even though it's a Marine Corps K-bar, a person doesn't have to be a Marine to get one. And since the sheath looks pretty new, that makes them think that the killer bought the knife recently, rather than being issued one during an actual enlistment. So police officers visit every business in town that sells combat knives. Unfortunately, none of them carry the K-bar knives, which means the killer must have bought it online. And without an actual suspect, investigators don't have any way of tracking that. It's not a total dead end, though, because they still have the sheath, which they can test for fingerprints and DNA. They send it to the Idaho State Crime Lab, then wait for the results. They cross their fingers that they hear back soon, because the mood in Moscow is getting pretty distressing. The public wants answers, but they're not getting them. Authorities haven't told the public anything about the knife sheath or any of the other evidence found at the scene. This includes a shoe print outside Dylan's door, which corroborates her claim of seeing a man in the house that night. Again, the police don't want to reveal anything that could help the killer cover their tracks, or that could possibly result in false tips from the public. But this strategy backfires a little, and soon the situation in Moscow becomes dire. After the murders at 1122 King Road, the Moscow Police Department and Idaho State Police are working hard to keep the details of their investigation under wraps. But this creates new problems for them. In the documentary One Night in Idaho, The College Murders, journalist Lauren Patterson explains that larger police departments have someone called a public information officer, whose job is to relay vital information to the community. But the Moscow Police Department is small. So when reporters contact the station asking for information, there's just one police officer trying to field everything. Suffice to say, reporters aren't getting the information they want, which means the public isn't getting the answers they want. So they start filling the gaps themselves. Based on the word of mouth, people know that 2 of the housemates survived. They also know that the other friends showed up the next morning to check things out. Pretty soon, people are flooding social media to play armchair detectives. People share a ton of criticism about how the friends handled things. Not only that, there's speculation about whether any of them were involved themselves. This is hard enough considering the trauma the friends are already going through, and to make matters worse, they're also worried that the killer isn't done and will come after them next. By now, the university has told students they can start taking classes from home, and a lot of students, especially the victims' friends, take them up on the offer and leave town. To try and widen the investigation, detectives shift their focus from the night of the murders to gain a better understanding of the victims' lives leading up to the attack. And one thing that sticks out to people is the fact that all the victims were involved in Greek life. Not only that, but at the time of the murders, the victims' 2 sororities were the only ones on campus that were currently suspended, both for issues involving alcohol, drugs, or hazing. Investigators start to wonder if the murders were alcohol or drug related. They speak to countless people to try and figure it out. The victims' close friends have even started to wonder if something happened at the Sigma Chi party that Xana Kernodle and Ethan Chapin had gone to that made someone want to target one or both of them. But ultimately, the Greek life element goes nowhere. Everyone the investigators talked to says the victims were well liked. No one can think of any reason someone would want to hurt them. Some of the victims' friends start to wonder if the killer was someone totally random. Since Maddie and Kaylee went out to the bar that night, they think maybe they ran into someone who followed them home. That's when Kaylee's sister, Olivia, steps in. Olivia's frustrated with how little the police are telling her family about what happened, so she takes matters into her own hands. Olivia begins collecting valuable information. She starts by looking through the call logs on Kaylee's phone. And that's how she discovers that after Kaylee and Maddie left a bar called Corner Club on the night of November 12th, they got a ride to a popular food truck called the Grub Truck. Olivia pieces together that they took a ride share, and she gets in touch with the driver. The driver says he picked them up from the Corner Club at 1:45 a.m. and brought them back to the Grub Truck. Afterward, he took them home, and they arrived at 1122 King Road at 1:56 a.m. But this isn't all. The driver also tells Olivia that the Grub Truck has a security camera. So Olivia goes there and asks to see the footage. Once she watches it, she confirms the rideshare driver's timeline. Then Olivia hands over everything to investigators, including the footage and Kaylee's call logs. It's worth noting that later on, the Grub Truck footage goes public. In the video, Kaylee and Maddie can be seen talking to a man who appears to be about their age. He has a hoodie on, so his face isn't visible in the footage. At some point, Kaylee and Maddie walk out of frame, and the man follows. This sparks immediate speculation over whether this man is their killer caught on tape. But investigators speak to him pretty soon after Olivia gives them the footage, and they clear him of any involvement. From there, based on these pieces of evidence, as well as other digital evidence, including the victim's text messages and social media posts, and multiple pieces of witness testimony, detectives piece together a timeline of the victim's final hours. Around 1:45 a.m., a friend drops Xana and Ethan off at the house. Kaylee and Maddie arrive home at 1:56 a.m. Around 2 a.m., Dylan and Bethany return home. Between 2:26 and 2:52 a.m., Kaylee calls her ex-boyfriend a few times. At 3 a.m., most of the housemates are asleep or in bed. And here's a crucial discovery from Xana's phone activity that night. At 4 a.m., Xana receives a DoorDash order. And at 4:12, she's scrolling TikTok. Then between 4 and 4:20 a.m., Dylan hears troubling noises and opens the door to see a strange man. Based on this timeline, investigators think Xana's DoorDash could have arrived when the killer was already in the house. Or maybe the delivery driver had something to do with the murders. Investigators subpoena DoorDash records to figure out who the driver was. When they speak with the driver, they confirm that she didn't have anything to do with the crimes. but she was at the house when the killer was there. It sends a chill down investigators' spines to think that the killer was lurking inside the house, possibly in the midst of attacking Kaylee and Maddie, while Xana and the DoorDash driver were completely unaware of what was going on and what was about to happen next. Unfortunately, the driver isn't able to provide a detailed description of anyone suspicious. This only adds to detectives' frustration. However, this witness isn't the only lead they're chasing. Soon, someone discovers a piece of evidence, and it breaks the case wide open. What did you think of episode 2 of our 5-part Idaho Murders Night Watch series? Drop your thoughts and theories in the comments, and stay tuned for part 3. See you next time. If you haven't already, subscribe to our YouTube channel at Crime House Daily and follow us on social media at CrimeHouse247 for real-time updates, because the pursuit of justice never stops.